Very well. Okay, I'm actually getting audio input here. Should be working, right? We'll try again. Can you just... No. Can you just check now? No, it's different. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Radha Gokulananda, Radha Gokulananda, Radha Gokulananda, Shri Radhe, Jaya Radha Gokulananda, Radha Gokulananda, Radha Gokulananda, Shri Radhe, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki Jai, Hare Krishna Mantra ki Jai, Nitya Gauranga, Hari Bol. Apologies for the technical difficulty. I hope everyone can hear me now. Very well, Kumar Govinda Prabhu, Shri Kamataji and Purushottam Prabhu, so far in the chat, and anyone else who's also watching. So, we talked last time. We talked about the first part in the second chapter. We talked about the first two sections, and we discussed how Arjun continues with more doubts for the first 10 verses, and then in verse number 7, he surrenders unto the Lord, and that marks the turning point in his attitude to the Lord. And so, in his attitude, and that marks the turning point in the Bhagavad Gita. Because before he's doing his own analysis and coming up with his own problems, but he simply becomes bewildered. He says, Karpanya dosho bhata svabhava, pritchami tvam dharma sammudacheta, yashaya shanishchitam bruhitan me, shishyasteham shadimam tvan prapannam, in verse number 7. And then he becomes devoted to the Lord, and he becomes a servant of the Lord. And so then Lord Krishna begins instructing, while smiling, he begins instructing. And the next 20 verses, so up till verse 10, you can say is one section. And the next 20 verses deal with the subject of the body and the soul, which is jnana, which you can describe as knowledge, because it's knowledge of the self, identity. And so this is what the next section deals with. We went through various examples, and that actually we spent the majority of the class on, because those 20 verses have so much detail in them that we didn't want to rush the rest of this. And so we talked about the knowledge of the self, as well as the problems that Arjun went through, and how that change in mentality and getting a guru in the form of Lord Krishna himself changed him. And so we end with this talking about that this body can be destroyed, but the soul cannot be destroyed. The living force within the body cannot be destroyed because it's eternal, it's unchanging, it's ever existing, it's primeval. It's not slain when the body is slain. It cannot be destroyed by various weapons. It can't be affected, etc., etc., because it's subtle. It's not gross like the body is. And so then we move on to the next section, which is from verses. Okay. So I'll just open it here. Sorry, the technical difficulties. You can never trust technology. And so we move on to the next section from verse 31 to 38, which describes karma kanda. Some people may describe as sakama karma yoga, but there's a specific difference. So yoga, of course, means connecting oneself with the supreme. Sakama karma yoga, kama means desire, if you like to translate roughly, and sakama means with desire. And so with desire, he's got the aim of connecting himself with God. That would be, or she, of course, that would be sakama karma yoga. But actually, these verses are not sakama karma, they're karma kanda. So karma kanda is where you do something for material gain alone. There's no other end goal past that. And so with karma kanda, you do it, you get your piety, you go up maybe to the heavenly planets, and then you come back down again. And so it's just like this cycle that goes on and on. And so with this karma kanda, it's different because it's only material. There is no spiritual aspect at all. And so this section deals with karma kanda side only. Thank you. And this is Bhagavad Gita again, chapter 2, verse 31 onwards. So here Krishna talks about Swadharma. Swadharma mapi chaveksha navikampitum dharma diyuddachreyonyat kshatriyasya navidyate. It's reminding your duty as a kshatriya, there is no better engagement for you than fighting on the religious principles. So why does Krishna again instruct on karma kanda? That might seem quite confusing. Why would Lord do that? And that's because that through this he moves on to something else later, and then we can see later on how this again is summarized in more detail in the Bhagavad Gita. So I'd also like to say if something might seem like it's too much or I'm going too fast, I'd like to apologize because in the end we will discuss these topics again in other chapters in which they're elaborated much more clearly. And so he talks about this material gain that you get from fighting. So when Arjuna puts forward his reason not to fight, in the first chapter we talked about compassion. We talked about, Arjun's feeling compassionate, he doesn't want to kill. Then he talks about what sort of enjoyment will I get? Is there any point in this enjoyment? Because if everyone's dead, then how can I enjoy? And even if I die, how can I enjoy? And then he talks about how this is so sinful, this killing of people. And finally, that the fact social structure will be destroyed, etc. And so Lord Krishna goes one by one and slowly, just like a logical argument, it's structured. And he goes and explains one by one about how this chapter how we can sort of answer those dilemmas that Arjuna's come through. And so he begins by explaining that the losses of fighting. So from verse 31 to 34, he starts explaining these problems of not fighting. So Arjun's saying, I don't want to fight because, I don't want to fight because that's the right thing to do. I just want to go and renounce myself. But instead, Lord is explaining that actually, no, when you don't fight, you just get more problems. And he's giving examples of all the problems that we'll experience in verse 31 onwards. So he talks about how, your duty as a Kshatriya, so this is the best thing that you can do. And then Arjun says that, I don't want to fight, I just want to relax. And so Krishna says that, okay, so you're saying, right, you're going to not fight and you're going to stop and walk away out of compassion. But what will everyone else speak of you? Huh? What would all the other people say? Akirtam chapi bhutani katayishyante te vyayam sambhavatasya chakirtir maranad atirichyate. People will speak of your infamy as a respectable person, and because you're such a respectable person, this dishonor to you is worse than death itself. And so I struggle to say that so much. And so he's saying that, people like Karna, Bhishma, Drona, they're not going to think, oh, look, he just left because he's compassionate. They're going to think, what a coward. Huh? What sort of idiot? He's just sort of seen how big this army is and he's just walked away. And what's more painful than having, people like your own enemies talking bad about you? Because he's a Kshatriya. Again, Krishna knows Arjun's Kshatriya nature. So he's explaining that these are sort of pains you'll have to go through if you don't fight. And then he talks about if you die in verse, I think this is verse 36. Verse 38 and 37. He explains that. So look, people are just going to chat about you. They're not going to be happy. They're going to be just talking nonsense behind you and talking about, oh, look, he couldn't do anything. He just went to the forest and renounced. And knowing your nature, that's not meant for you. That's not fit for you. And so he says that, atova prapyasi svargam jitva va bokshase mahim. You'll either be killed on the battlefield and attain the heavenly planets, or you'll conquer the earthly kingdom and enjoy that. So therefore, get up and with determination fight. Uttishta, tasmad uttishta kaunteya. He's ordering, get up and fight. Huh? And so this completely refutes Arjun's second and first argument. First argument is that he's compassionate, and Krishna's explained that actually your compassion is not going to bring about anything good, and actually it's better that you get up and fight because you need to remove these miscreants from the surface of the earth. And then secondly, Arjun talks about what enjoyment will I get? So Arjun says, if I win, then I'm not going to have anyone to live with. All my family are going to be dead, so I'm actually losing. And if I lose, then I lose my life. So if I win, then I lose. And if I lose, then I lose. And Krishna says, no, it's not a lose-lose situation. It's actually a win-win situation. Because if you win, then you get to enjoy the earthly kingdom without the problems that these Kauravas have brought. And if you die on the battlefield, then you'll actually attain a heavenly destination. So wholly material, again. The point is that this part of talking, there is nothing spiritual about this discussion right at this point. This is wholly material, only material gains that they're talking about. So just from a material point of view, Krishna has pointed out that the only way you can actually become happy is through fighting. So give up this sort of mentality that you have of renunciation and renouncing the work, and instead fight. And so he explains through that, it's a win-win, no matter what. And this, compared to Arjuna's an argument from before, Krishna is now explaining and refuting that. And so he describes how it's not correct to think that enjoyment will not be there, and how it's a win-win situation instead of a lose-lose. And so then Krishna explains, okay, now look, I've just been talking this is really materialistic. It's all about material happiness. If you do this, then you'll be happy. If you don't, then you won't, etc. So then in verse 38, he brings this to a little bit of a higher level. So in this section, the third section now, the point is that he talks about swadharma. You need to think about what is your duty, and you need to do that duty and live that duty, or whatever you need to do and become happy. And then he explains there's another level to it though. And then he explains in verse 38, do thou fight for the sake of fighting, without considering happiness, distress, loss or defeat, victory or defeat, loss or gain, victory or defeat. And by doing so, you shall never incur sin. So you should fight without considering the outcome, and in that way you won't sin. So it's about the detachment. So Arjuna's being detached from his work, and Krishna first reinstates through material side only, actually, no, you should work. It's not about detaching yourself from the work, it's about detaching yourself from the fruit of that work, from the result, from the outcome of that. Sukha dukke same kritva labha labho jaya jayo tato yuddhaya yujyasva naivam papam avapsyasi. So Arjun said, I'm going to incur great sinful reaction. He's saying in verse 36 of the Bhagavad Gita, first chapter, saying, Papameva shraya dasman hatvetana tatayina. Even though he's an aggressor, even though he's an aggressor, I don't want to kill him because I think I'm only going to incur sin because he's not just an aggressor, he's also my family member. And so Krishna was mentioning in verse 38 that you need to fight because that's your duty, but you shouldn't be attached to the outcome. So this is about detachment from the fruit rather than detachment for the actual work itself. There's nowhere in the Bhagavad Gita is it recommended the process of inertia, where you just sit at home or you renounce or you go to Himalayas and you meditate. Sometimes people have this conception that if you read the Gita, then it's just going to tell you that whatever you're doing is nonsense and that you should get up, leave home, and go and pursue spirituality and give up your material life. But no, that's not what it is. Arjuna is just about to start a war, so he's telling you to do the duty. Arjuna's, sometimes they say, this is for brahmacharis or for sannyasis. Arjuna's not a brahmachari or sannyasi. He's a family man. He's not married to just Draupadi, but many other wives as well. And Arjuna's given this Gita, the most important thing is at the time of distress, when he doesn't know what to do, when he's bewildered. And we are always finding ourselves in those types of situations, and that's why this Gita is useful to us today. This is not about give up your studies, give up whatever you're doing, give up your job, and just focus on the Lord. That's not what it is. It's do your duty without being attached to the result. So the detachment that you have, it's a good quality detachment, is great, but you should not detach yourself from the work, but from the outcome. And so that's the next sort of level that brings on the fourth section. First section, Arjuna changes his mind and becomes servant. Second section, we talk about the jnana, the knowledge of the true self, the body and the soul. And then from verse 31 to 38, we talk about karma kanda section, the only materially only material gains. And then we move on to the next one, which is not karma kanda, but it's either described as nishkama karma yoga or buddhi yoga. We'll just get on to explaining the technicalities behind that in a minute. Again, just as sakama karma yoga means with desire doing yoga. So nishkama karma yoga means without desire performing karma yoga, performing your action duty without the desire afterwards. And so this section is karma kanda. This section is not sakama karma yoga because it's nothing about the Lord that's coming. But the next section, which we're assaulting, section number 4, from 39 to verse 54, is all about nishkama karma yoga, which can also be described as buddhi yoga. So they are the same thing. So if I say one or the other, they are interchangeable. And so it's about doing your work in the consciousness of renunciation rather than being renounced from the activity itself. Very simply put. In verse 39, thus far, Lord Krishna says, thus far I've described this knowledge to you through analytical study. Now listen as I explain it in terms of work without fruitative results. O son of Pritha, when you act in such knowledge, you can free yourself from the bondage of work. And so it's all about doing your duty with the knowledge provided. The knowledge here that you talked about is the knowledge of the body and the soul. And so when we do the nishkama karma yoga, when we do our work with this knowledge, then it's either called buddhi yoga, because buddhi means intelligence, so you're working intelligently, or nishkama karma yoga, same, equivocal. So the new section starts. And then Krishna mentions this verse 2.40. Please note down if you're taking notes. It's a very, very important verse. I'll recite it. Neha vikramanashosti pratyavayo na vidyate svalpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. In this endeavor, there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. Mahato bhayat, the most dangerous type of fear. So even if you make a little advancement on this path, there is no loss or diminution. There's no going back. Once you go, you're only going in one direction, that's forward. That's it. And even a little bit of the advancement on this path can protect one from the greatest fear. And what is that fear? Fear of losing this human form of life, which we might not be able to get ever again. And so it's very important that we utilize our time wisely now. And people might think, how does that doesn't make sense. If there's a way forward, there's always a way back. How is that only a way forward? And so there's so many examples we can talk about. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about the example of Ajamil. Ajamil was a Brahmin. Well, that doesn't mean anything, but he was a Vaishnava. That means something. He's a devotee of the Lord, and because he's a devotee of the Lord, he had this piety. And then, although he committed atrocities afterwards, crimes, disgusting crimes, everything under the sun, and he finally got a second chance because of this little advancement that he made. So the greatest type of fear is losing his human form of life, but because he made that little advancement in the beginning, it protected him in the end. And so Ajamil was saved. He was given a second chance. Similarly, we can talk about, I was recently reading about Narad and his previous life in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, chapters 5 and 6. Narad explains to Vyasadeva about his previous birth, how he's got the association of great devotees, etc., etc. And so in his previous birth, he was the son of a maidservant. He got the association of Bhagavatas, great saints that came and stayed there for the rainy season, the 4 months. And then he moved on to, after he practiced devotional service through that life, then he passed away materially. Okay, obviously the soul doesn't pass away, as we've already mentioned. And so after he passes away, he goes back and enters into the Supreme Lord, because the universal annihilation happens. Brahma goes to sleep. And then the next day of Brahma, he still remembers all of this. He still remembers all of the things that he experienced in the past life and everything by the mercy of the Lord. And he's still able to practice devotional service. And now he's Narad Muni today. And everyone knows who Narad Muni is. And so, that's the number. I couldn't remember the number. It wasn't coming to mind. So the time of Lord Brahma's night, where there is no universe in existence, is 4.32 million years. Billion years. 4.32 billion years. And so even though this whole thing happened 4.32 billion years ago, he still remembered it afterwards. And he still can practice, he's still practicing devotion afterwards. Not practicing devotion in the sense that he was just given the opportunity to practice devotion from zero, from ground level. Wherever he left off his devotion, he practiced from there. You know, if you finish off at 10%, then you'll start again at 10% and then move on. If you finish off 11%, you'll start wherever you left. It's not like it disappears. It just builds simply. And actually, that time when Lord is instructing Narad Muni in his previous birth as the son of the maidservant, Lord Vishnu says that intelligence in my devotion cannot be thwarted at any time. This is the verse in the sixth chapter of the first canto. Cannot be thwarted at any time. So it's so important to take up devotional service to the Lord. So verse number 40 is extremely important because of that. And also we have other examples, the example of Jedabharat, who he was great devotee. Again, he got distracted by a deer when he was going to the forest. He was a great king, doing his kingly duty great. He was great devotee of the Lord. Then he thought, you know what, I'm going to give up. I'm going to hand over to my children, let them split the kingdom, and I'm just going to go and go to the forest and focus on the Lord. He went to the forest, and then over there, he somehow or other he got a deer as a pet, and this baby deer who was abandoned by the mother in a fright as the mother passed away. And then so he took care of this baby deer and treated it well. And so he kept on focusing on the deer rather than actually focusing on his duty to serve the Lord. And so in the next life, he got body of the deer. But in that body of the deer, he could still remember what he had done in his previous life. That's the most important point. There is no loss or diminution. In this endeavor, there is no loss or diminution. And so it saved him because, as he could remember in his previous life as a body of the deer, he was constantly trying to stay near the sages and listen to them. And then after that deer body he lost and he went onto a human body, that time he acted as dumb. He didn't say anything because he knew last time I made a little bit of a mistake and I wasted that opportunity. And so he acted as if he couldn't speak, he acted as if he couldn't understand anyone, and there's a whole separate story to that, but in the end he was elevated, and he was liberated by the Lord. And so we need to take up this path of devotional service, because any advancement that we make on this devotional service will never be lost. And that's a really important point that we can take from there, which also gives hope for us. So even if we don't finish in this lifetime, we may finish in another. So we should always take it up. It's not that the goal is not to finish it. The goal is to at least start and move on. Okay. And so the next verse that Lord Krishna talks about is Vyavasayatmika buddhir eke ha kurunandana bahushaka hyanantascha buddhayo vyavasayinam. Those who are on this path are resolute in purpose. Resolute means they're certain. They are determined. They know their aim is one. Resolute in purpose, and their aim is one. O beloved child of the Kurus, intelligence of those who are irresolute as many branched. And so all of these people who have this knowledge, they only have one aim. And that aim in the end is to come to the Supreme Lord. So there's a whole system of a ladder, if you would like, of this yoga system. But everyone on there only has one goal in the end. Eke ha kurunandana. O son of Kurus, their aim is one. And it's that is the only aim they have, which is in the end as a goal to serve the Lord. That doesn't mean they give up their work, but that means that they only have one aim in mind. And then Lord Krishna mentions in verse 42 and 43, men of small knowledge are very much attached to the flowery words of the Vedas, which recommend various fruitive activities for elevation to the heavenly planets, resultant birth, good birth, so forth, etc., etc. Desirous of sense gratification and opulent life, they say there is nothing more than this. Now, this is the first time the Vedic literature is even mentioned the Bhagavad Gita. We've come all the way to verse 42 of the second chapter, so we're already around about 80 verses in, and the first time this Vedic literature has been brought up. And of course, in the Vedas, there's, I think the description I just heard now was 100,000 lakh verses. So 100,000 times 10,000 verses. And so that's how many verses there are on the Vedic literature altogether. And out of this, 96,000 lakh verses, or 96%, deals with Karma Kanda alone. Karma Kanda, as we explained before, is material sense gratification only. No Supreme Lord, no how can I become spiritually increased, just let me do this, I'll get some piety, I'll enjoy, and then after that piety runs out, like a bank balance, I'll just become bankrupt and I'll come back and do something else here just to gain more piety. It's just going round and round and round in a cycle, which is explained in the 9th chapter. That's all it deals with. And so 96% deals with Karma Kanda, only 4,000 lakh verses deal with signs of the Supreme Lord, so which is only 4%. So in the Vedas, 96% is all just sense gratification, and it's all material. And these men of small knowledge are attracted by these flowery words. Yamimam pushpitam vacham. Pushpitam vacham, these flowery words of the Vedas. They are attracted by. Why do the Vedas have these flowery words? Because if at least they're doing this, it means they're not doing something bad. Yes, they might not be making advancement, but at least if you say, if you do this, you're going to become wealthy. If you do this, you're never going to have any disease. People will do these things at least, minimum. It might not make advancement for them, but it'll at least stop them from doing bad things. So that's why the Vedas are there. But as we know from 15, well, we don't know yet, but as Krishna will mention in the 15th chapter, 15 verse 15, chapter 15 verse 15, Vedesha sarver aham eva vedyo. Yeah, sarvasya cham, that's how it begins. But Vedesha sarver aham eva vedyo. Among of all the Vedas, I am to be known. The purpose of the Vedas is to understand self, Supreme Lord. And this self-realization brings us to that God realization. So, although they say there is nothing more than this, you know, Bhogeshwarya Gatim Prati, they've got their goal after they've enjoyed their Bhoga or their opulence or material opulences, whatever. And so, in a similar way, they just think that this is it, this is the end. And so, this is a whole set. So, Krishna's just refuting what he just said, actually, because he's just explained this Karma Kanda. But he said, Arjuna, I've explained this to you like this just to nullify your arguments, but actually this is not it. There's more to this, because there's an understanding of the Supreme Lord that's got to come as well. And so Lord Krishna then talks about these three modes are there as well. Traigunya Vishaya Veda, Nishtraigunya Bhavarjuna. So because the Vedas only deal with these three modes of material nature, separate topic, not this class, we will talk in the next class. Mode of ignorance, passion, and goodness. Three divisions of the modes of material nature, and these material modes, sort of as a way you might have seen that picture, they sort of are handling and making the making the living entities do actions based on these three modes, just like a puppet master has all those strings that helps move around the puppet. So these material modes of nature are dealt with in the Vedas, but from these material modes, we only get dualities and anxieties. And so we need to transcend the modes of material nature. And that's a whole separate topic in itself, but that's what the Vedas deal with. And all purposes of the well that a well has, all those same purposes can be fulfilled by the reservoir of water. If you have a well, those exactly what the same things that you need from that well, they'll all be fulfilled by a reservoir of water, and the reservoir of water can do more because there's even more in quantity. So if you take the purpose of the Vedas can be served to one who knows the purpose behind them, if that makes sense. So what we're just talking about is that these Vedas might seem that, this is certain, the small things that you might see. But if you actually know the purpose behind the Vedas, you get these small things as well as the bigger things as well. So that's the analogy that's given in verse 46. And so in verse 47, which is a very famous verse, everyone may or may not have heard it, but karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala heturbhur ma te sangostva karmani. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached to not doing your duty. So, a lot in that verse. Let's start off. You have the right to perform your prescribed duty. Karmanyeva adhikaraste. Karma, and then eva. So we talk about karmani, which means the work or the duty. Eva means like only, and adhikaras means like eligibility. The right, exactly, that's the word. You have the right to perform your prescribed duty, but you're not attached to the results of your action. You're not entitled to have the results that duty might bring. And then he also says that you shouldn't think that you're the cause of the results of your activities. You perform your duty. You are not actually the cause of the results. You're not entitled to the results. And also, thinking like this, you can't not be attached to not doing your duty. You should be doing your duty. You shouldn't be attached to the duty, the results of the duty. And instead, we should carry on carrying out that duty. So that's the important point. So Lord Krishna is saying in this case, in Arjun's example, you need to fight. You shouldn't be thinking that I have killed this person, or I have killed this person, or I have won the war, I have lost the war, because it's not actually I who's done that in terms of Arjuna. You're not doing that yourself. Actually, that is being performed outside of your being. The cause for that is not in your own existence, which is very technical, but it should make sense at some point. If not in this one, then in another class. And so we understand that it's the right mood of carrying out these activities is what's mentioned by the Lord in Bhagavad Gita. The right way of carrying out these activities. So it's about doing the duty without being attached to the result. This Nishkama Karma Yoga, Buddhi Yoga. And so we need to be equipoised. We need to be detached, and we should become equipoised. And I'll find the verse now. Yeah. Yogastha Guru Karmani Sangam Ketva Dhananjaya. Perform your duty while being equipoised, and Dhananjaya, who is Arjuna, abandon the attachment to success or failure. This equanimity is called yoga. And so in this section, which we're now coming to an end, Dhananjaya means control of the senses. No, conquer of the wealth. Sorry, Gudakesh, I'm thinking conquer of sleep. Dhananjaya means conquer of the riches. So you should be always attached to doing the work at least, and then we should not give up that work. We should instead not consider ourselves connected to the outcome of that work simply. And this equanimity, being equipoised in this sort of situation, this is called yoga. And then we discuss about by engaging in this type of this devotional service, the great sages or devotees free themselves from the result of work in the material world. Text 51. They free themselves from the work in the material world. They become free from the cycle of birth and death and attain the state beyond all miseries. Padam gacchantyanāmayam. It's a very important verse as well. I said that for a lot of verses. Every verse is important, of course, in the Bhagavad Gita, but these are the ones that we can take a lot from. And so the importance of devotional service is highlighted here. That we need to do this devotional service, and it will take us, with knowledge, the detachment will take us to the right goal. So you need the knowledge, of course, body and the soul difference. You need to do your work, and then you'll get the right goal from that. Of course, that goal, by doing service, with that goal is to go back to God, and by doing your duty with the right knowledge in the right way, you'll go back to Godhead. So it's all about karma, work, along with the jnana, the knowledge. You act both of them together. That's called Buddhi Yoga. And so you set yourself the goal of going back to Godhead, and you'll become free from the cycle of birth and death by practicing this yoga. Because yoga in the end means connecting oneself to the Supreme. And so we move on to the next section, which is about, you can describe as sort of Atmarama or Samadhi. This section where talk about controlling the senses and becoming more equipoised in general affairs. And so that's the next stage. We moved on from Karma Kanda to Nishkama Karma Yoga or Buddhi Yoga. And now we're moving on past that into various other ones. So it's not really one that you can summarize the whole thing with. And so Arjuna asks in verse 54, when he's hearing about all this sense control, he moves on to the next section. Who is this person who's situated in full sense control? The word for this is Sthita Prajna. Who is this Sthita Prajna? How does he talk? How does he sit? How does he walk? He's trying to understand what is a Sthita Prajna. How can he control the senses? Because there's so many things going on. How is he able to do that? Sthita Prajna means equipoise in the situation. He's got full control of the senses. Sorry if I didn't explain that. And so Arjun's asking, what are the symptoms of someone in that situation, and how do they execute that? And so Krishna talks about then how we need to find this sort of satisfaction. If one finds the satisfaction in outside things, it causes problems. Or if one finds satisfaction within the self, he's satisfied. And so he explains how, I'll just read the verse 55. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Prajahati Yada Kaman Sarvan Partha Manogatan Atmanyevatmana Tushtaha Sthita Prajnastadocchate. O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind is thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. So he finds satisfaction in the self rather than giving up desire for sense gratification. And where does that desire for sense gratification come from? Mental concoction, when the mind is not steady. And so the mind needs to be steady in this sort of situation. And he explains that how do you have this steady mind, this sthitadir? One who is not disturbed in mind even admits the threefold miseries, which are the miseries caused by the body, one's own body, so oneself, miseries caused by demigods, such as natural disasters, or whether that be miseries caused by other living entities. These are three categories of miseries. In the end, they're all miseries. So one who is not disturbed by the threefold miseries, or one who is not elated when there is happiness, is free from attachment, fear, and anger, and is called sage of steady mind. Not just not being affected by the miseries, it's also not becoming elated when there is happiness. So one is having this correct self-control and properly equipoised. Doesn't become happy and doesn't become distressed. This is the sort of equipoised stage that one needs to be at to be called the one with a steady mind. And so one who needs to, this example is given, the analogy is given. How does he do this? How is he able to perform this sort of removing from these senses? Lord Krishna gives the analogy in verse 58. One who's able to withdraw his senses from the sense objects, just like the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell, is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. Just as when the tortoise is scared of anything, it just hides within its own shell. Similarly, if you can take your senses away from the sense objects and focus them on the self, then that person is fixed in the right consciousness. And so this problem we can understand even in the practical day-to-day, because people always think, if I have this, I'll be happy. If I have that, I'll be happy. When we set ourselves goals, even in the modern day, it's important to set goals, but also the goals necessarily aren't always right. If I become, ripped or shredded, sorry, those are slang. So if I become big and muscular, then I am, that's one good thing. That's an improvement, and I'll be happy. If I become taller, if I do this, if I, if I become, shorter, if I become stronger, if I look like this, if my nose looks like this, if my belly looks like this, etc., etc. They're always saying if this, if this, if this. And so what they're doing when you're saying if to anything, even if you think, oh, you know what, I'm stronger now, that makes me feel happy, that happiness will only be temporary. And the next thing you'll think is, okay, I'm strong now, but I wish I was like that. And then you'll just look for somewhere else. This if thing is always making us look outside. So when you look outside of your own self for happiness, that happiness is not going to get you anywhere, because it's just going to be flickering, momentary, and then you quickly switch onto something else. And you just get more and more problems from that. And so this is why Lord is mentioning that we need to be happy within ourselves. The source of happiness should be situated within the self. Self-realization, understanding where the source of happiness is coming from the self. And so this is how you detach yourself from the sense objects. And why should we detach ourselves from the sense objects? Lord Krishna mentions in verse 62 and 63. Dhyayato vishayan pumsa sangasteshu pajayate sangat sanjayate kama krodha bijayate. The start of the cycle of despair, if you want. It just, one thing leads to something bad and it just goes down and down. It's just a whirlwind, terrible whirlwind that happens. So first thing, when contemplating objects of the senses, you become attached to them. And from attachment, lust arises, and from lust, anger arises. And then he explains later, it doesn't just end from attachment to lust to anger, it carries on. From verse 63, he talks about Krodhat bhavati sammoha, sammohat smriti vibhrama, smriti bhramshat buddhinasha, buddhinashat pranashyati. From anger, delusion arises. From delusion, bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost. And when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into material pool. All this started how? When a person develops attachment for the objects of the senses. The senses, the sense objects, for example, my nose, the sense of smell, and so for that there's an object, I'd like to smell something, etc., etc. So even though it might seem so subtle, as we mentioned actually in 4 Effects of Sin class as well, it's very subtle. It starts off with a simple desire that leads to the attachment, that leads to lust. Lust leads to anger when we can't get it, and then anger, we become deluded. We try and stop ourselves from anger. Some people will take up things like distractions such as alcohol and drugs and become deluded. And when they become deluded, you can't think straight. And your memory becomes bewildered. And when the memory becomes bewildered, intelligence is lost. And when intelligence is lost, you're not going to get anywhere. So this is what happens when contemplating too much over the object of the senses. And so this is why Lord Krishna was mentioning that if you think, if this, if that, I'll be happy. You might think, oh, wow, maybe even motivational speakers often, they might say, work hard to become the best version of you, but actually that's not going to get you the full happiness. Although it might get you some sort of happiness and you think, wow, I'm feeling more confident in myself. In the end, it's just going to move on from one thing to the next and one thing to the next. If you think, if I get this car, I'll be happy, you get that car, but then your neighbor gets a helicopter and you think, wow, okay, well, I need a helicopter now, isn't it? I can't just relax with the car. I need something else. And it becomes if and if and if. So if you keep on trying to source the happiness outside of yourself, these are the problems that come. So this is why one should become Atmaram, or self-satisfied. And you should control these senses. And you should become self-controlled and well-situated, properly situated intelligence. And so from this way, if you do like this, then you can actually get the mercy of the Lord. And so we've moved on now from Karma yoga, working in the right way without being attached. And if you're not attached, then you'll become like this. You'll become a sort of sthita prajna, become self-controlled, and you won't have any desires for all these sense objects. And then from this, there's also a little bit more. It doesn't just end here, because self-satisfaction is not the ultimate form of satisfaction. So we've gone through a lot here. So now we're up to verse 66. I have it here. I didn't need to check in the book. We're up to now verse 66. Nasti buddhira yuktasya nacha yuktasya bhavana nacha bhavayatah shantir ashantasya kuta sukham. One who is not connected with the Supreme can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, and without which there's no possibility of peace. And how can there be any happiness without peace? If you're looking for happiness, you need peace. And if you need peace, then for peace, you need a steady mind and intelligence. And steady mind and intelligence don't come from just withdrawing oneself from the objects of the senses, but they come from being properly situated in Krishna consciousness. And this is where it's a little bit of a difference. Now, with people who do meditation and things like that, their aim is to become desireless. Have no desire. We have no desire. We just meditate. We focus on the breathing. We just focus on the stretching of the body and the limbs like that. Yeah, that will get you to a certain stage of self-control, and you'll think straight, you'll be peaceful, but that's not the ultimate form of satisfaction. Because past that, there's something else. There's this Krishna consciousness. And being situated in Krishna consciousness provides one with even more than self-satisfaction. Self-realization is important, and when self-realization happens, God realization also comes. And so we find another level of happiness. So first, we need to forget these material miseries and happinesses. We shouldn't become happy due to material things. We move on from that stage into self-situated, removing from the senses with control, self-controlled, etc., very peaceful, calm, well situated in the mind. But you will be satisfied. Well, we will be satisfied. But even though it's hard to think, there is another level past that satisfaction, which is providing even more happiness. And that is devotion to the Lord. That is bhakti. So in the Road to Bhakti class, we actually mentioned this just in a slightly different way. Same points and same sort of style that we discussed about how we start off. You need that knowledge. You need a little bit of knowledge. You don't just do karma kanda and become going up and down and up and down. We don't just do that. Instead, we do karma yoga, a little bit of action, while renouncing ourselves from the results of the action. And then we not only do we need to do that, we also need to renounce ourselves from the action, from the fruit of the work, while staying attached to the action, doing the duty, giving up the results. And then we move on into controlling the senses. This is often done through meditational processes, dhyana yoga. So karma yoga moves to dhyana yoga. And then through this meditation, there's actually a little bit beyond that. It doesn't just end there. It's not impersonalistic. It actually moves onto bhakti yoga, which is as the road to bhakti. It's the way you come to bhakti. Through understanding all of these, you'll be able to understand. It's a ladder from karma yoga to move on to dhyana yoga, then to move on. Dhyana means meditation. So from karma yoga, moving on to that meditational process to control the senses, and then moving past that to bhakti yoga, because bhakti yoga provides even more happiness. And so we talk about that. If the analogy is given about how the sense subjects are deviating, just like we described before, how the anger can attachment leads to lust, anger, etc., cycle of downfall. Similarly, there's another explanation given in verse 67. As a strong wind sweeps away a boat on water, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can take away man's intelligence. So that's why it's important to have this sort of restraint from the sense objects. And then we move on to the next bit. Not just Atma Rama, but there's a level beyond Atma Rama. Atma Rama means satisfied with the self, satisfied with the mind and body. But past that Atma Rama, there's another stage. And I was reading in Sutta Prabhu's book, and so there's another stage. And I thought this is a wonderful example to give. So in Srimad Bhagavatam, I'd like to explain a story to explain this point wonderfully. Shukadev Goswami, he is an Atma Rama. He's satisfied with the self. He's so understood that he is not the body and that he's the soul that actually he walks around naked. He doesn't care because he knows I'm not the body. He's so mentally elevated past that position, so transcendentally situated that he doesn't care. He just thinks it's fine. I know I'm not the body, I'm the soul. And there's a story given that when there are a group of damsels bathing, they're bathing and Shukadev Goswami walks past. And instead of covering up their bodies, they carry on. But when Vyasadeva walks past, Vyasadeva is Shukadev Goswami's father. So when Vyasadeva walks past, they cover their bodies quickly. And so Vyasadeva thinks, well, that doesn't make any sense. When he walked past, you just left. Why did you do like this when I walked past? And explain what your thinking is. And so they say that we know that he's transcendently situated. He's way past this platform of the body, whereas you're still situated on the bodily platform, is what they say to Vyasadeva. But the point is all right? And so the point is, because it says that the sage makes such distinctions of the body. So the point is that Sukadeva Goswami is already such transcendently situated. He's already in that stage of Atmarama. And yet, he went through this hard study of Srimad Bhagavatam. Why did he go through? It's described in the first canto, 7th chapter, verse number 10. A wonderful verse. Again, whole story behind this greatness of this verse and how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives 61 meanings. But this verse is given here. Sutta uvacha atma ramascha munayo nirgranta pyurukrame kurvantya haitu kim bhaktim ittam bhuta guno harihi. All different varieties of Atmaramas, those who take pleasure in the Atma or the spirit self, especially those on the established path of realization, although free from all kinds of material bondage, desire to render unalloyed devotional service unto the personality of Godhead. This means that the Lord possesses transcendental qualities and can attract everyone, including the liberated souls. So although these souls are already self-satisfied, they are Atmarama, they are taking pleasure in the self, there's also a level beyond that. And even they desire one thing. They are not desireless. And even though people might think that this is the end, you just end with desirelessness, they desire one thing. And that is to render unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. So this is how great the Lord is himself. The Lord is transcendental and so all-attractive in nature that even the liberated souls who are already self-realized still want to serve him. They derive happiness from serving the Lord as well. That is the nature of the Lord. When we talk about pure love, from before we talked about there's material love, which provides one sort of happiness. Then there's there's true love, which is where one does without any expectation these sacrifices, and then pure love, one focuses and directs this energy on Lord Krishna. And so the whole point of this section on this chapter is that it's all about becoming materially renounced, and then internally as well at the end, not just being materially renounced, but internally become spiritually attached. Material renunciation is one thing, carrying out your duty, doing all of that, but then spiritual attachment is the next thing, which is dealt with quite nicely in the middle 6 chapters, and later on as well in the Bhagavad Gita. And so in this way, the chapter 2 deals with all of the Bhagavad Gita, but just in a sort of crash course. And that's why it's, of course, called the contents of the Gita summarized. And yeah, later explained. That's what the point of the contents of Gita summarized is, because it carries on from there. And so, And so the first section in chapter 2 we discussed from verse 1 to 10 is Arjuna changed his attitude, and he says, Karpanya doshapata svabhava prichamitvam dharma samuditesha cheta. And then he ends up saying the line, Shishyaste ham shadimam tvam prabandam. I'm your disciple, and I'll do whatever you tell me. And we learn the importance of getting a guru and a spiritual master from that. And also when we become confused, we know the right way to turn and the right place to look at. And so the first thing that Lord Krishna mentions in the second section of this second chapter is from verses 10 to 30, jnana, the knowledge, and the knowledge of the self. Identity, understanding the soul, that we are the soul and not the body, moving on from the bodily platform to understanding that we are the soul. Then after that, he entices Arjuna just to fulfill his arguments, just to carry on that argument. He just explains through material ways only in the third section of Karma Kanda why Arjuna's points are all invalid. All of Arjuna's points are invalid. He goes on to explain about how there is enjoyment still if you fight, how if you don't fight, there is only loss, there is no gain from that. And so like that, he explains that there is no sinful action, etc., only material. But then he moves on and says, actually, that material is not enough. Even though the Vedas might tell you that just do this material thing and you'll be happy, that's not enough. There's something more than that. And so not just doing material things, we also need to understand the goal in mind. So doing this karma yoga with the goal in mind, understanding that we do the action, we don't detach ourselves from the action that we're meant to do, but we also do the action while giving up the results. Then giving up the results, we also need to slowly learn to remove our senses from the sense objects, because when we attach our senses to the sense objects, we become we become bewildered and become deluded, etc. And so moving that from the sense objects, we move our happiness to within our own entity, within our self, and become self-realized and self-satisfied. And then past that dhyana or that meditation or controlling of the self, there is also another level called bhakti. And that level of bhakti provides happiness which cannot be found anywhere else. And even the great souls aspire for this bhakti. And this bhakti, or the transcendental devotional service to the Lord, is the greatest of all these which have been mentioned so far. So it's a sort of path or a progress or a ladder in which these activities are mentioned. And finally, it's all about internally becoming materially renounced while carrying on the duty. But also, as we go through later, we also realize that not just becoming materially renounced, but we also need to become spiritually attached to Lord Krishna. Hare Krishna. So that is that's the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. quite hefty in philosophy. I'm sorry, the other ones will have a little bit more stories in them, but we had to get through this somehow or another. These points, if you didn't understand now, you can always watch this video again, and also they'll be elaborated again. For example, chapter 3, Karma Yoga, is explained all properly in more detail and elaborated. So the rest of the Bhagavad Gita actually talks about subjects that have been taught in here alone: 3 modes of material nature, the yoga processes, etc., etc. It carries on later. So if there's any questions, comments, corrections, doubts, please do put them in the chat. And that is the summary of the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Haribol, sorry, I didn't say Haribol to everyone. Haribol, Shikha Mataji, Purushottam Prabhu, Raj Kumar, Govind Prabhu, Bhuvaneshwari Radha Mataji, Shashi Mataji, and Indu Mataji as well. Thank you all so much for joining, even though we had the technical difficulties and all the problems. We will try and sort them out for next time. Thank you very much, Raj Kumar, Govind Prabhu. I'll just wait a minute or two, so if anyone's typing, then they can type the questions out. And I'll also like to mention, actually, which I should be mentioning as well, is the important verses from the chapter. Please take into account the importance of devotional service and using it, because there's no way you can lose it, from verse number 40. Please do focus on that if you don't take anything else from this class. Okay, Vyasdev had darshan of the Lord, and I thought this was going to be a bit controversial when I said it. Vyasdev had darshan of the Lord and considered as one of the expansions of the Lord, empowered expansions. So how is he considered as not highly elevated? This is just an example that the damsels are giving to say why did they not think that they should cover themselves before Shukadev Goswami, just to instate his great position. That's it. That's the only reason it's given, isn't it? And also that's that's another point. So Vyasdev is a householder. He's grihastha. He's not just brahmachari. He has a wife and he has children, and he's a family man, and therefore he has to make a difference as well. So that's the point that Prabhupada makes in the purport, in that relation. And so it's not that one should not think that Vyasdev is not elevated, or Vyasdev is not devoted to the Lord, or Vyasdev is materially situated on the bodily platform like we are situated on the bodily platform. That's not the right way of thinking. The point is that even the great Atmaramas like Shukadev Goswami, even though they are self-satisfied, he undertook such a difficult study of Bhagavatam because he enjoys and he relishes so much the understanding of Krishna and Lord Krishna. So that's the pure devotion. That's bhakti. Bhakti Yoga. Haribol Purushottam Prabhu. Is there anything? It doesn't look like we have anything else. If there is nothing else left, thank you very much, Shikamataji. If there's nothing else left, then again, please do bless me that I might be able to do a decent job and also improve my own Krishna consciousness, do a decent job of explaining this Bhagavad Gita, and also improving my own Krishna consciousness and become better devotee. Again, everyone on this call is my senior actually, so please bless me that I might improve. And with that, I'd like to say Hare Krishna, Hare Bol. Please join us next time for Chapter 3 summary. Next Sunday, 4 o'clock, same time, same place, your own home, and prasadam will be served at home. Hare Krishna, Hare Bol.